is up, guys? We are back, and I want to cover some things that stuck out to me about the opening night, Boston hosting the Knicks, and of course, it got a little bit out of hand very early on in the game, but for each team, I just wanted to list off some key observations and then synthesize them into takeaways going into the regular season. Very quick video. I'm experimenting with some of the content format that I want to do for my first full-on season of covering the league. So we're just going to try this. And if you have any feedback or ideas, of course, I'm always open to them. Thank you. Number one is Boston. I think clearly the first thing that needs to be touched on here is the three-point massacre. Their whack-a-mole offensive scheme of finding the open shooter, constant drives and kicks. Everybody can not only shoot and score, but they can initiate, make secondary reads. They clearly know where everybody is going to be at all times, be it from a secondary, a tertiary guy driving, and everybody's always relocating. And then, of course, the offensive rebounding. Culminates in 17 first half three-point makes. That is coming off of a season last year with 16 on average per game, and they made 17 in the first half alone. I think it's fair to kind of point to some of the defensive stuff on the Knicks side, but just looking at the Celtics, I think the easiest way to synthesize this is their whole whack-a-mole offensive scheme feels extremely close to maximized. The idea of finding the open shooter, having primary, secondary, even tertiary drivers who can also facilitate. Everybody understands where they're supposed to be around the arc. Everybody knows where to relocate to if they find themselves as the one driving or if there is an offensive rebound. So it just creates this very simple feeling, but highly efficient and effective offensive framework. Again, the biggest nuance that sets Boston apart from everybody else in the league, maybe besides Oklahoma City, is that every single player can not only finish plays by making threes, shooting, finishing at the rim, but most importantly is the facilitation factor. Everybody can pass and everybody understands, again, where anybody is ever going to be at all times in the half court. On top of that, I'm not sure if this is an added emphasis, but if Boston gets an offensive rebound on you, you can pretty much automatically add 3 points because it is going to bring some kind of a wide open perimeter shot a lot of the time. And you can tell in like Tibbs post game and stuff where he says, yeah, if you don't rebound against this team, you're going to lose. It's quite simple. Even with obviously Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, one game deep, fine. But in general, they are going to hit those kinds of kick out threes in those contexts at an absurd clip, and they're all very eager and waiting for it. Second is Tatum's explosion. Obviously, coming in, everybody understands the narrative that I feel like every single media member really wants to push here with the USA Basketball not getting any minutes, also not getting Finals MVP. Of course, there's some validity there as far as how his shooting performance wound up being, and again, with the USA Basketball, thank you, Steve Kerr. Okay, jokes aside. Tatum looks super locked in and clearly wanted this to be a statement game. Coming on ring night, that's just going to add some fuel to the fire as far as getting yourself focused and pumped up. So Tatum ends with 37, 4, and 10. Those 10 assists, very impressive as well. A lot of people are just going to point at the three-point shooting, but he did a phenomenal job assisting, reading some of the schemes. The Knicks definitely gave him different looks, and he did a great job getting off ball really quickly. Of course, when everybody's a point guard essentially around you, it really helps, but 10 assists is really great. In the shot-making department, he goes 14 for 18 field goals in total, 18 shots, that's pretty healthy, and then 8 for 11 three-pointers. So first thing I want to point out about that, there was a lot of buzz around his shooting mechanics, some of the off-season stuff he'd been working on. there definitely was a hitch prior to the summer, and last night looking at it, it looks slightly smoother. I think it's definitely coming out faster from a when I get the ball to when it comes out. But to me, the big thing that stuck out was the intentionality and the confidence. It felt like the Celtics were emphasizing higher ball screens away from the arc because Tatum is enormous. And when you think about a higher ball screen taking about 1 or 2 steps max to just get up to the line, guys coming over that high ball screen are already just going to be behind him. And unless you're Wembanyama, you're probably not going to be able to block it from behind. So it made sense schematically to integrate that idea. But with Tatum specifically, it felt like something he had been working on every single day in the offseason. And again, the intentionality coming off of these screens, it felt like Damian Lillard-esque, where there was no shot he was going to be passing these walk-up threes, and he was knocking them down, completely looking at the rim from the jump. Just really, really great stuff to see. And so, yeah, mechanics, sure, the hitch, whatever. I think by far the most important upgrade to me was not seeming as timid and just taking these shots by the throat and not even thinking about them whatsoever. Even without a ball screen, Tatum seemed extremely confident, doing his pretty classic pounding the air out of the ball a little bit outside of the arc, doing an ISO dance, and then sizing up his guy. But I mean, these shots were just falling. And again, I can't really point to anything besides a lot more seemingly intentionality and confidence behind these shots. It obviously helps when he went, he made like 4 threes, 5 threes maybe in the first quarter. You're just going to be riding that wave at that point. That's going to help, but that caught my eye as well. And the last point is, of course, when you are coming off of the pick and rolls, high ball screens, and walking up and hitting threes with confidence, and then even hitting off the bounce, pull-up threes with confidence at a good clip, it's just going to make closeouts even harsher for him to then attack and distribute or finish. So all around, this felt like the dream scenario of a, air quote, perfect offensive game for Jason Tatum. Establish himself early, just like Luka Doncic does. He's going to come out in the first quarter with like 9 shots maybe, try and get himself going from the outside. Coming off of screens or not, he is going to find himself that way, develop that rhythm in shooting from beyond the arc, leverage the early on shot making to get into the mentals and psychology of the defenses to then warrant harsher closeouts and get his whole assist and facilitation game going. Kind of reminds me a bit of Dallas, where, again, Luka's going to come out absolutely firing. He is very, very pick and roll heavy, so it makes sense because he really needs to study and understand from the jump how defenses are going to guard him and drop, coming up to the level, who's going to be open, where my pass is going to be, that kind of stuff. Last night, Tatum was basically doing the exact same thing. I don't know how many times I've seen him and really felt like he was confidently assuming the Luka Doncic role of give me the screen, give me the reads, establish my own shooting potency first, which then unlocks the closeouts, the kickouts, and everything else. So sincerely props to him. This maybe actually was one of the best games I've ever seen him play. I'm sure there were some playoff ones where he really exploded, but very, very awesome to see, especially with all of the context and swirling narratives around him. So other thing I thought was great, and Reggie and Harlan were talking about it on the broadcast, it feels like Derek White has got the green light, which is so, I don't want to say overdue, but it felt like he was pulling up, again, on kickouts or cross-court passes, even 4 or 5 steps behind the arc. It's beyond clear at this point. This guy's a sensational outside shooter, doesn't need much space or time at all. And whereas in the past, it felt like he was being a little more mindful of generating the best shot possible in your San Antonio Spurs, Oklahoma City kind of mindset there. I think Missoula just told him, look, just start chucking these shots. We are going to lean into the outside perimeter potency model at least earlier on, even more than last year. Clearly, again, they were chucking the fuck out of the three in the first half of this game. Obviously, they were hitting a lot as well, so it's a positive feedback loop. But it very much feels like Boston is trying to set the tone very early. And Derek White, you're a really good shooter, so we need you to start chucking shots. Hopefully, you make a lot of them, get defenses pressed up on us, and then we're going to put you in the entire spin cycle to ice this game in the second quarter. And that's kind of what happened. So that segues really nicely into the overall takeaways component, which is establishing the three as early as possible. Feels like Boston is going to chuck even more threes at the onset of the game to establish the perimeter potency, as evidenced by the fact that Derek White was not hesitating whatsoever on these pull-ups. Jason Tatum as well, much more confident, much more intentional on these higher ball screens or even unassisted ones. Maybe he'll make them, maybe they won't, but you're establishing the willingness from the jump. Yo, I will shoot this. I do not care, which is just going to invite harsher closeouts, defenders pressing up even more, which make or miss is just the kind of psychological warfare and merry-go-round that Missoula wants Boston to establish right away. Next, the chinks or vulnerabilities, if you can call them that, for this insanely stacked team on defense and offense. On the defensive side, I genuinely feel like the Horford switch, because Boston will let him switch out on the perimeter, unlike Porzingis, where they usually have him more in drop. He's super long. Pros and cons against different opponents, but especially in the context of a longer playoff series, God forbid Porzingis gets hurt again. Now you're going to have a 38-year-old kind of defending in space. Is he going to be able to keep up, especially if Boston finds itself finding one of the Titanic bigs in the Eastern or Western Conference these playoffs? Obviously, they didn't last year. So you go against a Giannis or an Embiid or a Jokic, gonna be kind of interesting. You get maybe a smaller guard like Brunson or somebody else onto Horford defending in space again. I just think about these things always in the context of playoffs. That might be something that over the course of a longer playoff series could end up becoming a air quote vulnerability. On the offensive side, I still feel like the interior finishing versus the perimeter might actually be your best bet in terms of thwarting the Celtics and slowing them down. Obviously, 3 is greater than 2, but also the level and rate of actual finishing near the basket, it still doesn't feel nearly as prolific as the outside whack-a-mole style of find the open shooter. And all of these guys, I mean, it feels like these guys have taken 100,000 threes from every single spot on the floor that they're always relocating to. And so selling out to the perimeter and forcing certain guys, maybe White, maybe Drew, to be finishers near the rim, I actually think might be something to consider. Which leads us to the last takeaway here, which is I still believe in the East without seeing anyone else play and yada yada. I still think that Indiana is their biggest threat in the Eastern Conference. Their notoriously awful defensive system is so bad because they sell out so hard to the perimeter. I don't know how much of that was Rick Carlisle looking at the Celtics style of play or Oklahoma City or whatever and being like, we just have to sell out to the threes, whatever. But of course, it invites a lot of walk-ups and finishes at the rim. And again, like I just said, I actually think that model might pick the best poison when you look at the Celtics. And then when you think about the Celtics on defense, the pace and depth and capitalization on transition might be the other air quote defensive chink for the Celtics outside of attacking their bigs like Horford, who they're fine with putting out in space and yada yada. It drives fatigue in a very long series, and obviously constantly running up and down when you are so top heavy as a unit, that can start to matter. Obviously your focal points, the Jays, are getting into their primes, so physically they'll be fine. But again, you think about the Horfords, you have to be pushing in transition, because once Boston sets its half-court defense, so hard to score in general. So you want to capitalize by getting the mismatches that you can, pushing that pace or whatever. Indiana is also the closest in the Eastern Conference, in my opinion, to the Celtics in everybody basically having some degree of guard skills, the trifecta of pass, dribble, and shoot. Everybody's eager to get off ball. Everybody is willing at least to shoot from the outside, even if they're not hitting at a 45% clip from the perimeter. Frequency and the rate of actual shot taking can matter when you think about getting in the minds of the defense. So a lot of guys can handle the ball on Indiana. A lot of guys can play make as well as shoot. That forces Jalen and Jason to be more of the type of defenders that they don't necessarily thrive in, which is off-ball defense. Everybody knows they can be very effective when they're on the ball, point of attack. But when they are off ball, it has been a running issue, concern, maybe shortcoming of theirs with their off-ball attentiveness, awareness, and taking advantage of back cuts, that type of stuff. Obviously, Indiana capitalizes on all of these things because if everybody's a threat, you have to be unbelievably focused and aware of every single player, especially yours, at all times. And you have to be able to be very quick twitch and dynamic in your changes of pace and direction with back cuts and handoffs and all of these things. Not to mention, again, the overall pace that Indiana plays at constantly wearing you down. The slower the pace that New York plays at, the better it falls for the Celtics to shut them down. Indiana's pace, the depth of guys they have to sustain the pace that they want to play with, drives fatigue that not many other teams do. They also have a large proportion of facilitators, secondary facilitators, and outside shooters, whether they're making them a lot or at least taking them a lot, that forces a lot of this chaos. And again, Boston in the half court is virtually impenetrable besides their center in Al Horford, potentially. And even with that, having the Porzingis and drop, better have some mid-range shooters. So everybody being a chaos agent and running all over the place forces Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown to be off-ball defenders as much as on-ball, where they're definitely not as strong at. The overall fatigue driving the pace and the level of concentration and awareness that style of play requires defending. And then on the defensive end for Indiana, they sell out to the perimeter. So I don't know how well you can make a balancing act looking at the roster that Indiana has. Not to make this an Indiana fucking podcast here, but they're not going to be good on defense by any stretch. But again, thinking about picking the better poison is selling out to the perimeter against the Celtics is going to force guys like Jrue Holiday and Derek White to have to finish. I'm not saying they're bad finishers. I'm just saying, just like the Warriors in the mid-2010s, these kinds of three-point avalanches can simply be insurmountable, like what happened in the first and second quarters last night. Now over to New York. Number one is that the Harden 5-out model is different from the Boston 5-out model or Oklahoma City. What we saw last night was still a ton of usage from Brunson in their 5-out model that seemed to mirror that James Harden, Luka Doncic style of the 5-out, now incorporating Cat, which is also the model that got Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving eaten alive in the finals, because besides everybody being a facilitator and play finisher on offense, what differentiates Boston on defense is that they have the best defensive backcourt in the entire NBA. You can't really effectively switch off of Jrue Holiday and onto Derek White and expect a huge upgrade in your penetration ability or separation creation. This to me is how and why Boston forces teams to play their style of basketball. Everybody else has to be able to put the ball on the floor as well. I don't care who you are. I think literally besides Nikola Jokic, there is not a singular player in the NBA that can consistently exploit or create advantages on the Boston Celtics. And the only reason Jokic probably stands a chance is because Porzingis cannot stay healthy for an entire playoff series. I don't buy it. And if he's going up against Horford and Kornet, I can guarantee you that that is going to be the worst imaginable matchup for the Celtics. But Jokic is a one of one, and nobody else is playing that style of offense. Bringing it back to New York, Brunson being a heliocentric engine is not a sustainable model for beating the Boston Celtics. Full stop. Brunson is fantastic, but you are, one, gonna wear him the fuck out. Two, it's just not going to result in as effective advantage creation because of the level of defensive potency in Boston's backcourt. What you need are guys like Josh Hart, Mikal Bridges, and OG Anunoby being a lot more ready, willing, and capable of attacking closeouts and making secondary reads. What we saw last night, OG extremely hesitant, and frankly, in his entire career has not been a great guy putting it on the floor to, one, create his own shot off the bounce, but two, make those secondary reads. Mikal definitely has way more proven history of playing this kind of role, but as we'll get into, he seemed extremely unconfident, and I don't know how much of that was just Boston playing there or just new team and all the expectations, but didn't look confident at all doing that, and Hart just the same. Because of Tibbs's traditional, kind of conservative, very trust-dictated decision-making as far as Brunson, I trust you. Here are the keys. You're going to drive everything. What we saw last night was a very heliocentric approach to offense that I definitely don't think maximizes some of the strengths and capabilities on this roster. And then in general, with a bullet, you are not going to beat the Boston Celtics using a heliocentric model unless you are the Denver Nuggets and have the greatest player on the planet, because Boston centers are just unfortunately injury prone, old, and not as great in space. Two is the Cat and Josh Hart two-man game. Only saw this a few times throughout the entire game, but it's no secret that the other team's worst defender, usually their best offensive player, is probably going to be the one defending Josh Hart because of his unproven perimeter shot-making ability and overall offensive skill set. And so if you do a pick and roll against a switch-heavy team like the Celtics, Hart can get Cat great entry passes with great positioning on a potential mismatch like we saw last night, where Jrue Holiday ends up switching on to Karl-Anthony Towns. And as fantastic as Jrue is as being an all-around defender, that's a mismatch. And seriously, a lot of people are going to learn how fucking skilled Karl-Anthony Towns is. That stuff worked, I believe, twice in a row. And so that's why I just want to call that out. The two-man game between Hart and Cat, Josh Hart just better be practicing entry passes with Cat, because, again, the worst opposing defenders are always going to be on Josh Hart, which therefore means him as a air quote pick and roll kind of facilitator, or at the minimum just entry pass maker, might be a helpful ploy to use. Next is Deuce McBride has a Cam Thomas switch. I'll be honest, I didn't really know this guy too well. I know he came in and seemed extremely confident in the playoffs last year as a result of all the injuries that the Knicks sustained. Really wasn't sure how reliable or consistent some of his shot making was, but oh my God, this dude seems able to get his own shots without any help and hit them at a very high rate against very prolific and potent defenders. This kid scored 22 points in 25 minutes, missing only 2 shots and taking 10. He went 4 of 5 from 3. I don't have the numbers, but I don't think many of them were assisted at all. It also kind of felt like he was playing with a chip on his shoulder after the Dante DiVincenzo trade, where, oh my God, we lost our 6th man, now we have absolutely no depth and we suck. Kind of felt like he heard that, and the whole doomerism stuff was taken to heart, and this dude just started raining shots and not missing. I was just happily surprised, and most of the Knicks fandom should be as well. So props to him. Last but not least, Mikal and Josh Hart look pretty broken. Did not like the body language whatsoever on either of these guys, particularly on the offensive end. Very eager to get off the ball. Very unconfident shots, especially with Mikal earlier on. I think he went 1 for 6 or something before making his first 3. And a lot of these shots, I know the form and the hitch and whatever, it just doesn't look good. I almost feel like, back to the Jason Tatum of it, is if you're confident and decisive about taking shots, I think it's going to help the optics of your shooting form, as well as what it does in the defensive psyche in terms of crashing and potentially creating advantages for you. Mikal didn't have either. Like, you can't have bad shooting form and then no confidence. It's just going to look awful. He had issues with both. Jason Tatum, slightly better shooting form, but tremendous confidence last night. And clearly it all paid off and he was nailing shots. I just say that to say Mikal was lacking both. Clearly the shooting form looked weird. I think he actually changed some of it mid-game last night, but also just the confidence is just every time he rose, it felt like, hey, I know I should probably take this, but I'm just not feeling it. So don't love that. Josh Hart constantly running all over the place. You could tell they were sagging off of him on defense. He clearly could not establish his outside perimeter potency, missing, I believe, his first 2 or 3 that they were basically giving him wide open. But even outside of that, running around the perimeter and trying to get involved in other ways, everybody knew he was trying to get off the ball as fast as basically possible and then pummel the shit out of whoever he could to get the offensive rebounds, as everybody saw in the playoffs last year. I don't know how good I feel about Josh Hart on this team. This is something I really am saying. I know it's really early to say it. We're literally 1 game in. Some of the quotes about having no idea what he's doing and the loss stuff, and then seeing it translate into some of the environments that they are probably going to have to play in come the postseason. Hopefully for his sake, this kind of stuff can iron itself out and he can figure out the best way to contribute offensively specifically, but goddamn, does that dude look pretty fucking useless offensively, man. And we'll see what he can get to, but really did not like his body language either. For both of these guys, though, something I was thinking, at least in the second quarter onwards, was these guys are really athletic and really, really long. And while Drew Holiday and Derek White are very, very athletic, I really feel like transition and getting themselves to the free throw line is something that could really, really elevate this team. Obviously, Mikal has more of the on-ball juice as far as driving, finishing, shooting, but he's a mid-range guy, and it doesn't seem to be higher up in the pecking order of, some of the stuff in his bag. But Hart specifically, he pushed the pace in transition a couple times, and it resulted in free throws, like I'm saying. It just feels like those could be potential outlets for this team to not always be so stuck in the mud with your heliocentric Brunson ball that is going to play right in the hands of Boston. Overall takeaways is Josh Hart, Mikal, OG don't compare to White, Jaylen Brown, and Tatum in terms of guard skills. And when you think about these 2 teams going head-to-head in a playoff series, it's extremely likely to me that that series outcome comes down to, simply put, the Knicks guys do not have the secondary playmaking or initiation skills that the Boston guys do, as well as the chemistry, which is potentially just as important. The guys in the Knicks clearly don't understand all of the spots around the arc or even inside of it that all of these reads are going to be. Obviously, you're reading, reacting to what the defense has given you, but you see the way Boston's subliminally and almost subconsciously just flinging passes, seemingly without even looking at where they're going to go with this kind of offensive scheme. Again, if you're trying to diversify away from a heliocentric model, you kind of need that sort of zip to create as much of an advantage as you can, like the Celtics do with all of these zippy passes. You have to engage the Mikals and OGs and Harts to make those secondary reads way faster. So it comes from probably some skill development, which is just going to mean reps and reps and reps, especially for OG and Hart. But on top of that, figure out that chemistry and make your game plan as far as where guys need to go, especially given the fact that the Knicks make their money on offensive rebounding. If you're going to have Hart and Cat crashing the boards, which we saw a ton of last night, they shouldn't even have to think an iota of a thought to know exactly where the kickout passes have to go. Really, really need to be monitoring that for the Knicks this regular season, see how they figure it out. And then also the historically slow pace or the heliocentric nature of the Brunson ball stuff, I really don't think is equipped to overcome Boston's defensive scheme. If you let Boston set up in the half court defensively, you're going to have a bad fucking time, as Dallas realized in the finals. Unless you're Nikola Jokic and you have a point center, where the Celtics center is the only air quote chink, if you can even call it that, in the lineup, provided KP cannot even sustain a single playoff series. I'm doubtful of that. But if that's the case, it's either your center is going to be the engine of the offense, or you kind of have to play the the Celtics' 4 or 5 playmakers or secondary initiators on the floor at all times. You have to create chaos and make all these zippy passes in order to generate open looks. This is why Boston makes you kind of play its own style of play, because they are so willing to switch everything, making the perimeter shot making very, very difficult, which means you have to create advantages from kind of the inside out through drives or your centers, whatever, posted in there. And so the outside in approach of the Luka Doncic pick and roll, let me get in here, yada, yada, it's gonna be really fucking hard. Capitalizing on pace and transition is going to be a huge leg up for breaking into this Boston defensive infrastructure. Lastly is that the historically slow pace of the Knicks and this new heliocentric 5-out infrastructure is not going to win against the Boston Celtics. If you're trying to penetrate Boston's half-court defensive infrastructure with a heliocentric model like a Brunson or Luka Doncic, you are going to get fucking rocked unless you have 40% three-point shooters from the 2 through 4. Right now, the Knicks don't. And as we saw in the finals, it really fucking sucks for your Brunsons if they cannot get by the Brunsons, Whites, or whatever, or guys are just sitting in the gaps ready to eat them alive. There is a very good reason why the Celtics themselves said that Indiana was their toughest opponent last year. Pushing the ball and pace and transition, not letting Boston get set in the half court defensively, having the depth of guys to sustain that pace, even with secondary units. Boston's very top heavy, so a lot of guys are going to play a lot of minutes, which over the course of not only a game, but a series is going to mean guys are going to get really fucking tired, especially Al Horford. But most importantly, like I've been saying nonstop, is you have to have 3 minimum playmakers or secondary initiators on the team aside from your point guard if you're going to play outside in, like James Harden, Jalen Brunson, Luka Doncic style of play. The only way to really break down Boston is using pace or attacking its center. And unless you're Nikola Jokic or I guess Embiid, I don't even think so though, because he can't take it on him. It's gonna be fucking hard. You just have to play faster. You cannot give up offensive rebounds. It's an automatic 3. And you have to trust your other guys to be secondary facilitators in order to get the chaos washer dryer system moving and ultimately generate a higher quality outside shot and try and compete hitting that critical mass of 3s and giving yourself the chance to beat the Celtics at their own game. At least somewhat.